Si on continue de nous priver de notre ressource, nous sommes obligés de prendre les pirogues et de les retrouver là-bas en Espagne. Parce qu'on ne peut pas rester sans survivre.
We are at the end of the world. Punta Arenas is a city located at the southern end of Chile, overlooking the Strait of Magellan and Tierra del Fuego. For this reason, this inhabited center is also known as the last city on Earth, or more simply, the end of the world. This is a symbolic place for the history of humanity. Passing along these coasts 500 years ago, Ferdinand Magellan became the first man to circumnavigate the planet. Centuries later, Charles Darwin made a stop on these same shores on his journey of exploration to discover the origin of our species. Why are we here today? How did we get to this remote place? A frontier land of human civilization, thousands of kilometers away from home. This is the last stage of our trip, the arrival point of a journey that began some 2 years ago. A journey of exploration, one could say, to investigate the fastest growing food industry on the planet, fish farming. An industry that is only a few decades old, but which grows exponentially every year, promising to feed the increasing world population. But it is not without its controversy. Accused by many of only aiming to generate profits, leaving behind a trail of destruction of natural resources, conflicts, impoverishment of entire communities, and abuse of human rights. We took this journey to find out more. And to do so, as happens on every trip, we took the first step right behind our own home, among the mountains of central Italy. We are on a trout farm along the Nera River, a small stream that crosses the mountains in the green heart of Italy. The farm is practically invisible, hidden on a bend in the river surrounded by trees. Just as invisible is the secret it hides. From here comes almost all of the trout that are sold in restaurants and supermarkets and even in the sport fishing lakes of this part of central Italy.
Qui sono, tra piccoli e grandi, ci sono circa 2 milioni di pezzi, di più. Sono 900.000 quelle piccole, stanno circa 3 milioni di soggetti. È tutto un processo naturale gestito con il computer. Noi sappiamo in ogni vasca quanto pesce c'è, quanto mangime mangia, quanto pesce muore. Se ci sono delle patologie in corso, noi dobbiamo per legge dichiarare e usare i mangimi consentiti dalla legge.
Questi qui li abbiamo messi da poco per salmonà. Questi fra 2 mesi sono pronti.
Italy is the country with the highest total expenditure on fishery and aquaculture products in Europe, with a per capita consumption of 30 kilograms of fish per year. Consumption soars, particularly in the summer months, when restaurants in coastal areas almost exclusively serve fish to millions of Italian and international tourists for lunch and dinner. Trout is only one of the species bred in Italy. Others are marine species, especially sea bass and sea bream, bred in large cages at sea.
Questa è più grossa, quella là era 3.000 metri, questa è più grossa che è 25, circa 5.000 metri cubi.
Quindi a livello di unità quanti sono più o meno?
Ma di là sono 140, 150.000, qua sono circa 200.000 pesci.
A few days of research were enough to discover that the vast majority of the fish served on the tables by the sea does not come from the fishing boats stopped at the marinas, but is produced on a farm in Italy, or more often, abroad. In just a few decades, fish farming has grown to the point that today the quantities of globally farmed fish have exceeded those which come from fishing.
Se ti dico delle orate, tu vai al ristorante e dici che mangi un'orata di mare. Solo il 7%, 8 neanche, dell'orata che mangiamo viene dal mare pescato.
So today, aquaculture produces 50% of the food fish that we have on our tables, which are marketed across the globe. If we go back maybe 30 years ago, aquaculture did not have a production level so high, but in the last 3 decades it's been going up steadily, between 5-6%, a bit slower now, but it's an industry, it's the fastest food production industry in the world.
The Food and Agriculture Organization, as well as other international bodies inside and outside the United Nations, are not mere witnesses of the enormous growth of fish farms, but are an active part of this change, its invisible engine.
FAO is working with its member countries saying, let's develop aquaculture. We need more fish, simply because today the average consumption rate is around 20-21 kilograms per capita. If we want to keep that same consumption rate per capita over the next few decades, we have to produce more, simply because the world population is growing.
Imagine a world where fisheries and aquaculture can transform nutrition and food security to feed the world's growing population. Blue transformation is not only possible, blue transformation is needed if we are to nourish and sustain a growing population. But it must begin now. It must begin with us.
However, Italy is not the country in Europe that is attracting the majority of investments in fish farms. With an overnight trip by ferry, we reach the port of Igoumenitsa in western Greece. The country is the cradle of modern civilization, where our culture has its roots. It is also the nation in Europe which in recent years has attracted the greatest investments for the development of fish farms, especially sea bass and sea bream. With 130,000 tons produced in 2021, Greece is the main producer of farmed fish among the member states of the European Union. In recent years, the Greek government has been working to further increase fish production and exports to the rest of Europe, but also to the United States and the United Arab Emirates.
Θα γίνει η ζώνη P6 των ηχθειοτροφίων της ΠΟΑΗ που προτείνεται. Θα έχουμε 1.000 στρέμματα για να παράγονται ψάρια και 1.000 στρέμματα για υδροανάπαυση. 2.000 στρέμματα περίπου δηλαδή, μόνο ηχθειοκαλλιέργειες σε αυτή εδώ την περιοχή. Κοντά είναι οι παραλίες που κάνουν μπάνιο ο κόσμος, δίπλα απέναντι είναι τα νησιά Κάλαμος και Καστός. Θα είναι μια καταστροφή, γνώμη μου είναι, για την περιοχή.
Τα τελευταία χρόνια έχει γίνει μια τεράστια προσπάθεια η περιοχή μας να γίνει ΠΟΑΗ, δηλαδή περιοχή οργανωμένης ανάπτυξης ηχθειοκαλλιεργήτων. Επειδή προβλέπεται το μέρος να καταληφθεί πλήρως από ηχθειοτροφία, είμαστε ενάντια σε αυτό.
The reason why Greece is able to attract more investment among countries in Europe is a rather lax regulatory system. Almost all farms in Greece are located near the coast, between 50 and 200 meters away from the mainland, and almost always in enclosed areas. Bays, archipelagos, small gulfs, marine spaces characterized by the absence of currents.
A lot of countries sometimes say, they don't put so much attention. They won't come out with rules and regulations of this is how you do it right and this is what you're not supposed to do and this is what you're supposed to do. Sometimes they let the industry grow. So they start developing, and at that point when there is a little bit of a critical mass, then maybe they are in a position to start regulating the industry. So we have seen this, all over the place, because if you start creating a lot of difficulties, it's very difficult for the industry to start.
The lack of currents is also one of the reasons why the proliferation of cages causes concern among local communities, who see with their own eyes the impact of farms on their territory.
Μιας και θεωρούμε ότι τα εκτετροφία έχουν προκαλέσει μια τεράστια οικολογική καταστροφή και στη θάλασσά μας και στα ψάρια μας.
La Poseidonia era completamente verde, banchi di Poseidonia infiniti. Oggi trovi tutta la Poseidonia ingiallita, si vedevano una marea di gamberi, non se ne vede più uno. E io ti sto parlando nell'arco di 10 anni, più o meno. Oggi lì, che è stata invasa dalle fish farm, una desolazione. Ed quel posto era qualcosa di incredibilmente bello.
According to some environmental impact studies, for every 1,000 tons of fish farmed in Greece, 1.8 tons of organic material, uneaten feed, feces, dead fish, and other waste are discharged into the sea. To understand the real impact of these discharges on the shallow waters, we participate in the expedition of an international team of researchers coordinated by the Greek Archipelago's Marine Institute in the region of Aetolia, Akarnania.
C'era molta materia organica sospesa nella collana d'acqua, quindi la visibilità era molto scarsa e il sedimento anche appunto al tocco non era soltanto fango ma era proprio materia organica derivante da feci, sì, dall'acquacultura e anche cibo avanzato, magari non riescono a mangiare tutto il cibo quindi molto viene portato via. Quindi ci sono delle correnti ma non sono abbastanza forti secondo me da diluire tutto e viene tutto accumulato da quella parte della baia. Non abbiamo trovato pesci, ma semplicemente invertebrati, quindi spugne, ricci di mare o luturie.
E questo è anche spiegato dal fatto che non è presente la Posidonia, esatto. O se è presente è fortemente deteriorata da tutta la situazione, perché la Posidonia deve sopravvivere in un ambiente in cui c'è ossigenazione, c'è luce e non deve essere soffocata appunto da tutta la materia organica che invece dà l'acquacultura.
Esatto, infatti possiamo vedere da quest'altra parte invece della baia che la Posidonia è sana perché forma delle praterie molto fitte, molto ben strutturate senza essere frammentata. Adesso vedremo negli altri siti, ma questo è un caso appunto che può essere d'esempio.
All fish farms in the open sea have the same problems related to the production of organic matter, because raising millions of fish in a confined space inevitably leads to the accumulation of feed and wastewater. Imagine setting an intensive chicken farm in the sea, expelling manure and uneaten feed directly into the water. Furthermore, the production in the country suffers a widespread condition of illegality.
Πρέπει να παράγουν περισσότερα ψάρια, έτσι βάζουν περισσότερα από την ποσότητα για την οποία έχουν άδεια. Σε ένα κλωβό που έχει άδεια για 80.000 ψάρια, μπορούν να βάλουν έως και 120, από ότι η περιοχή υπερφορτώνεται.
Moving by car along the coasts of the Peloponnese, we reach a former employee of Avramar, a multinational company based in Valencia, Spain. The company is the largest farmed fish producer in Europe and alone handles 70% of the fish farmed in Greece. The man agrees to speak with us, but asks to maintain anonymity, fearing retaliation from the company.
Το άλλο που έκαναν που ήταν πολύ κακό, πετούσαν τα νεκρά ψάρια στο βυθό. Δεν τα έβγαζαν να τα κάψουν όπως ήταν η νόμιμη διαδικασία. Έπρεπε να τα βγάλουν, να τα κάψουν και να τα απορρίψουν σε ένα ειδικό μέρος. Δεν το κάνουν αυτό, τα ρίχνουν στο βυθό. Τα νεκρά ψάρια σημαίνει άρρωστα ψάρια και τα ψάρια που ήταν έξω από τα κλουβιά τα έτρωγαν.
Over the last few years, Christos Lavertos, also a former employee of the same company, at the time called Andromeda, has been exposing through social media identical irregularities.
Όσον αφορά τις χημικές ουσίες που χρησιμοποιούνται στις εχθιοκαλλιέργειες, το κυριότερο πρόβλημα είναι η φορμόλη. Γιατί οι εταιρείες αυτές, αντί να δουν την ποιότητα της παραγωγής, αυξήσανε κατακόρυφα την παραγωγή, βάλανε εκατομμύρια ψάρια μέσα στις φάρμες για να τα μεγαλώσουν και να τα πουλήσουν στο εξωτερικό αλλά και στην Ελλάδα. Με αποτέλεσμα, μέσα στη θάλασσα και σε κλειστά σημεία όπως είναι όρμοι, ορμίσκοι κτλ., όταν βάζουμε εκατομμύρια ψάρια, επειδή η φύση δεν είναι φτιαγμένη να δεχτεί ένα τόσο μεγάλο αριθμό ζώντων οργανισμών, ή και τα παράσιτα βρήκανε πάρα πολύ μεγάλο αριθμό ψαριών και έκαναν έξαρση.
Both former workers also report frequent violations of workplace safety standards.
Μιλούσα με έναν διευθυντή για το θέμα της ασφάλειας και το ρώτησα: θες να μιλήσουμε σοβαρά για την ασφάλεια ή το θέμα είναι μόνο για το λιμενικό? Για τις καταδύσεις πρέπει πάντα να είμαστε δύο οδηγητές την ίδια ώρα και στο ίδιο κλουβί. Όμως δεν τους ενδιαφέρει αυτό, γιατί είχαμε πολλά δυστυχήματα στις ηχθειοκαλλιέργειες. 4-5 ειδήσεις έχουν πεθάνει. Ένας πρόσφατα μπλέχτηκε στο δίχτυ και πέθανε.
This is the temple of Poseidon on the small island of Poros in the Saronic Gulf. We reached the island with a 2-hour ferry ride from Athens. Once in this place, the ancients worshipped the gods of the sea, faithful to a culture that recognized the sacredness of all the elements of nature, understanding the dependence of man on the surrounding ecosystem. Today, this temple is in ruins, and the stretch of sea behind it is destined to become an area for the development of industrial aquaculture.
Βρισκόμαστε στο βόρειο τμήμα του νησιού του Πόρου και πίσω μας είναι οι ακτές της Αττικής, τα Μέθανε, η Αίγινα και ακριβώς από πίσω μας είναι το σημείο στο οποίο θα αναπτυχθεί η ποαή του Πόρου. Υπάρχουν ήδη κάποιες ηχθειοκαλλιέργειες εδώ, αλλά σε πολύ μικρή κλίμακα. Αυτές θα πολλαπλασιαστούν, η παραγωγή τους θα πολλαπλασιαστεί πολλές φορές με το νέο σχέδιο για την ποαή. Θα καταλάβει το 1/4 του νησιού, το 25% των ακτογραμμών και της στεριάς.
Poros farms also produce sea bass and sea bream. The plan in this case is to increase the size of the current plants by 28 times, up to 270 hectares, to produce almost 9,000 tons of fish per year. The island of Poros is the typical example of a conflict between a small local community of 4,000 inhabitants trying to protect its territory and livelihood against two investment funds essentially looking for profit.
My name is Tor Tolseth, and I'm the chairman of Avramar, and a private equity investor. Today, it's more than 6 years ago, I landed at the airport here in Athens, having set up meetings with several of the biggest fish farming companies in Greece. And the objective of these meetings was to find out if there was a way for us, as a sector-focused fund, to invest in the Mediterranean aquaculture industry.
The Poros farms also belong to the multinational Avramar. The company is controlled by two investment funds, Amera, based in the United States, and Mubadala, the sovereign wealth fund of the United Arab Emirates.
Aquaculture development can be small scale but also it actually brings in a lot of attention from the big players. There's a lot of companies which not necessarily are in the field of aquaculture that are interested in investing in this new production industry. So they're not all that familiar with what the rules attached to aquaculture. So they just want to go out, produce and make money for their customers or for who is investing in this company and so on and so forth.
By their own admission, private equity fund Amera's goal is to increase Avramar's production capacity and sell off its assets in a few years to ensure short-term profits for its investors.
The salmon farming industry, which also started in the 80s and 90s, today produces around 2.5 million tons. And the combined Mediterranean aquaculture production is around 500,000 tons. So for us as an investor, we saw that, number one, aquaculture is an industry with strong tailwinds. And at the same time, the Greek aquaculture industry and the Mediterranean aquaculture industry could not take out the full potential.
Δεν θέλουμε στις ακτές μας ικτιοτροφία. Ο κόσμος που ασχολείται με τον τουρισμό από τις 4.000 κατοίκους είναι το 80%. Λοιπόν, όταν χαλάσει το περιβάλλον της θάλασσας και το 1/4 του νησιού που είναι πευκόφυτο θα μπορούν να κάνουν οποιασδήποτε εργασίες πάνω, μοιραία ο τουρίστας δεν θα έρχεται πια για να απολαύσει το καθαρό νερό, τη θάλασσα και το πευκοδάσος του νησιού.
Είναι ένα πολύ ακραίο μοντέλο, είναι ένα μοντέλο που δεν ξέρω να έχει εφαρμοστεί, σίγουρα όχι στην Ελλάδα, είναι κάτι καινούριο. Είναι κάτι τελείως, θυμίζει απικιοκρατικά μοντέλα που ίσως τα έχουμε δει στην Αφρική, στη Λατινική Αμερική, που έρχονται τεράστιες εταιρείες και οικειοποιούνται τον δημόσιο χώρο, και ακριβώς αυτό προβλέπεται και για τις ΠΟΑΗ. Είμαστε σε μια δημοκρατική χώρα που όλα τα αιρετά όργανα που προβλέπει το Σύνταγμα και οι νόμοι και για το πώς λειτουργούν και τι εξουσίες έχουν πάρει την απόφασή τους και έχουν κάνει την επιλογή τους που λέει ότι εδώ δεν θέλουμε να γίνουν κάποια πράγματα. Και τελικά η πολιτεία έρχεται με κάποιες διαδικασίες νόμιμες, παρακάμπτοντας τη λαϊκή βούληση και τις αρμοδιότητες των αιρετών οργάνων, και επιβάλλει με το ζόρι να γίνει κάτι που είναι τελείως κόντρα στη βούληση της τοπικής κοινωνίας, το οποίο αυτό κάτι θα εγκαθιδρύσει και θα δώσει ρόλο διαχειριστή μεγάλου τμήματος της επικράτειας σε μια ιδιωτική εταιρεία. Αν αυτό δεν το πούμε απικιοκρατικό μοντέλο, δεν ξέρω πώς αλλιώς θα μπορούσαμε να το χαρακτηρίσουμε.
The island of Poros is not the only place where we hear about colonialism while making this documentary. At this moment, we find ourselves on another island, a place that has become a worldwide symbol of one of the darkest pages in the history of humanity. The fiercest face of colonialism of past centuries. We are on the island of Gorée in Senegal, West Africa. From the 15th to the 19th century, this island was one of the largest clearinghouses for the slave trade. The walls of this house exude stories of thousands of lives, often children, deported to the island after being enslaved in continental African countries. In this courtyard, entire families were sold by European traders to be embarked on death voyages across the Atlantic Ocean to the colonies of the New World. Today in Gorée, there is a museum bearing witness to this chapter of the history of humanity. We visit the island a few days after arriving in Senegal, tracing back the journey of raw materials used in fish farms in Europe. Between these walls, we wonder if we have really left behind the era of oppression, or if the law of the strongest oppressive force in the last century has not simply changed its face. To better understand what we are talking about, we must take a step back, returning for a moment to Greece.
Quindi le mangimi sono basate, diciamo, su due cose principali: farina di pesce, quindi il mangimi di pesce è pesce, e altri ingredienti di natura vegetale, diciamo. Quindi il pesce mangia pesce. Noi usiamo mangimi che contengono il minimo 42-43% di proteine.
Capito?
Sì, dipende sempre dalla specie. Per esempio, le spigole hanno bisogno più di proteine di più perché sono pesci carnivori. Queste sono fatte in Grecia, però abbiamo anche altre fatte in Italia. Per esempio la scretin qua dentro, sono tutte greche. Però le materie prime vengono dall'estero, perché se farina di pesce quasi tutto viene dall'estero.
Fish meal to produce feed for fish farms is made with small pelagic fish that would be suitable for human consumption but have modest commercial value. One of the main paradoxes of fish farming is hidden precisely in these huge bags of feed, omnipresent in fish farms. The amount of captured fish that are used to feed carnivorous species such as sea bass and sea bream, but also salmon, trout, tuna, or even shrimp, is much more than the fish that is produced in the farms.
Aquaculture, compared to livestock or agriculture, is a relatively new industry. If you just go back 30, 40 years ago, talking about salmon, forget it. I mean, we didn't produce not one salmon. If you go back in time, there was a lot of criticism. For example, farmed salmon, you need to feed them. They are enclosed in cages. They are not able to capture their own food. So what you feed them? You feed them with artificial feed. The artificial feed that actually was developed at the beginning was a feed that had a very high level of fish meal and fish oil from pelagic species, which are perfectly good to eat. And the percentage of this fish protein and fish oil was extremely high. So there was also an ethic question, an ethic issue behind all this. They said, why use very good fish to produce another kind of fish which is affordable, not from everyone, whereas the pelagics are very cheap and very affordable. And then why would I want to produce 1 kilo of salmon when I need 7 kilos of pelagics? So that actually created a lot of concern. But the industry has adapted very fast, has been very conscious on developing activities which were sustainable.
Por ejemplo, una piscifactoría que yo conozco aquí en la provincia, pues los piensos suponían el 85% del gasto de la piscifactoría. O sea que el gran gasto es el pienso, porque tú tienes que darle de comer toneladas a lo largo de un año. Ese pez es un pescado voraz. Entonces, tienes que producir muchísimas toneladas de pienso.
Francisco Matarabaza is a doctor who for 30 years has been inspecting fish farms along the east coast of Spain. We meet him in the gardens of the Polytechnic University of Valencia. We do a stopover in the Spanish city to visit the headquarters of Avromar, the company we met in Greece.
Este sistema, que actualmente es el más avanzado que existe para distribuir el pienso, permite evitar el desperdicio de pienso, optimizar las dosis para que el pescado lo aproveche mejor y reducir al máximo la emisión de pienso al medio.
En los piensos de aquí viene mucho de África. Están haciéndose fábricas de harinas de pescados en el origen del pescado, a lo largo de África. En América Latina, en la zona de Perú, donde hay pescado pequeño, barato, que te sea cómodo para fabricar harinas de pescado, pues seguro que es ahí donde están las fábricas y eso se transportará ya preparado en el pienso total o separado.
Donc ces usines de farine de poisson, ce qu'ils font, c'est qu'ils utilisent le poisson, donc qu'ils transforment en farine et huile de poisson pour aller exporter ça en Asie ou bien en Europe pour nourrir d'autres animaux. Ce qu'on considère être, même du point de vue éthique, pas normal, mais aussi du point de vue de la gouvernance des ressources, on pense que donc, ces ressources qui sont déjà considérées comme surexploitées ne devraient pas être utilisées pour produire de la farine et de l'huile de poisson pour aller nourrir d'autres animaux alors que les populations locales en ont besoin.
Here is the reason for our trip to Senegal revealed. We are following the supply chain of fish meal used in the production of fish feed in Spain. Cayar is a fishing village 60 kilometers from Dakar. To reach it, we need more than 2 hours by car from the capital, through a bumpy road that points north, through villages of shacks and small brick buildings. In 2019, the Spanish company Barna built a fish meal factory in the village. The company talks about itself as a small company, specializing in the production of fish meal and fish oil from waste, committed to sustainability. What we see with our own eyes around the Cayar factory is quite different.
Moi, j'étais à l'école, je faisais l'école jusqu'à 1996. C'est en 1996 que j'ai abandonné l'école pour aller en mer. En 1996, de 1996 à 2011, il y avait abondance sur la mer. Il y avait beaucoup de poissons. Mais en 2010-2011, avec la présence des bateaux étrangers, les bateaux russes qui étaient venus ici, ont pillé les ressources. Et nous avons senti qu'il y a la baisse de la ressource. On ne voit plus la ressource. Mais lorsque l'usine de farine de poisson est venue, nous étions dans le programme de la régénération des ressources. C'est pourquoi on a implanté ici une aire marine protégée. Tous les pêcheurs vendent. Il y a beaucoup de pêcheurs qui vendent. En tout cas, l'usine a des mareyeurs qui viennent sur la place. S'ils trouvent le poisson, ils achètent ce poisson et l'amènent à l'usine.
Puis, avec son arbre, il n'y a pas assez de poissons. La ressource se fait rare. D'autant plus que les preuves, ils vont pêcher toutes les sortes de poissons, même les plus petits, les plus grands. D'autant plus que l'usine a besoin de tous les poissons pour faire son marché.
The fish meal industry has grown a lot in just a few years in West Africa along the migratory routes of sardines. In 2019, Greenpeace surveyed 50 fish meal factories in Mauritania, Senegal, and Gambia. But that number has increased in recent years due to investments from Europe and, increasingly, from China.
La majeure partie de ces usines appartiennent aux Chinois et aux Européens. Donc c'est globalement ces deux entités qui produisent, qui ont investi dans cette industrie en Afrique de l'Ouest.
Mais en tout cas, l'usine est espagnole. Nous avons même fait des plaidoyers jusqu'à écrire à l'Union européenne, lui dire que vraiment il faut arrêter ça. Parce qu'on ne peut pas nous empêcher de vivre chez nous et nous chasser chez eux.
Avant, il y avait de la pêche 12 mois sur 12, les pirogues partaient en mer. Et maintenant, il y a une période de campagne. Si c'est fini, les grandes pirogues ne vont plus en mer. Seuls les petites pirogues qui vont partir à la pêche. D'autres vont sortir du village, d'autres vont partir à la mer avec les petits pirogues.
Et toi?
Moi, je reste attendre la prochaine campagne. Je travaille que la campagne, pendant la campagne. Après, je ne travaille plus. J'attends la nouvelle saison.
A few hundred meters ahead of the fisherman's beach, we reach a square with rows of stone benches. On one or two banks are piles of small fish, sprinkled with salt for drying and preserving. The rest of the square is empty, left to abandonment.
On a les clients qui habitent au Burkina avec les Togolaises là, les Togolais.
Alors, vous prenez les poissons de les pêcheurs,
les
vous les
pêcheurs,
salez?
les salés pour vendre notre client là. Mais dans ce cas-là, nous n'avons rien du tout, pas de poisson. Même dans la 2020 jusqu'à 2021, nous n'avons pas de produits, rien du tout. Parce que les usines, avec les qui là, le usine de farine de poisson, n'a rien du tout. C'est lui qui achète tout. Le déchet qu'on pourront acheter pour amener ici, pour transformer, c'est lui qui achète. Parce que c'est cher pour nous. Pour travailler ça, c'est cher pour nous. Parce que lui, il peut acheter à 8 000, à 7 000. Nous achetons 3 500, 4 000, 5 000 au moins. Mais maintenant, c'est difficile pour nous. Ici, nous sommes 20 femmes. Mais maintenant,
ils ont que
4 seulement.
Et les autres?
Les autres, elles sont à la maison. Elles sont abandonnées parce qu'il n'y a rien de travail. C'est ça le problème. C'est pas bon pour nous. C'est très très difficile. Nous n'avons rien de poisson à travailler. Vraiment. On demande les partenaires de nous aider à dégager le usine là. C'est ça qu'on demande.
Auparavant, lorsque des industries de farine de poisson ont été créées dans le passé, c'était pour prendre les rejets de poissons, c'était pour prendre les déchets et les valoriser. Mais il n'y a plus de déchets à valoriser parce que la ressource, elle est même rare. On constate même qu'il y a des espèces de poissons qu'on ne consommait pas, qu'on consomme maintenant. Donc, de plus en plus, nous constatons que ces entreprises de farine de poisson ne s'adressent pas à la transformation des déchets, mais sont alimentées par des pélagiques. Le pêcheur, sachant que même s'il débarque des juvéniles, il y a un marché, mais il va connaître à le débarquer. Donc les entreprises de farine de poisson également déstructurent toute une économie.
Les juvéniles, c'est interdit ici au Sénégal par notre code de la pêche. Donc, on n'a pas le droit de pêcher des juvéniles. Mais pourquoi les pêcheurs pêchent les juvéniles? Parce qu'ils ne trouvent plus de poissons en mer. Ils font des kilomètres et des kilomètres, ils ne pêchent rien. Donc, s'ils voient des juvéniles, ils pêchent ça. Arrivés aux plages, ils ne peuvent pas vendre aux consommateurs parce qu'on ne peut pas manger les juvéniles. Donc, ils vendent directement ça aux usines de farine de poisson. Et ces usines de farine de poisson achètent ces produits-là pour faire quoi? L'huile et du farine. Pour faire quoi? Aller nourrir des animaux alors que la population est là.
Not everyone in Senegal protests the presence of fish meal factories. Back in Dakar, after visiting the fishing village, we visit Samboudien, the most famous fish market in the capital. Here we meet some fishermen who tell us how convenient it is for them to work with the fish meal factories instead of with the women who take care of the efforts to serve the local population.
Mais pourquoi l'usine? Travailler avec l'usine, c'est plus mieux que travailler avec on le vend avec les femmes là qui vont au marché poisson. Mais si tu travailles avec l'usine, c'est plus rentable que vendre les poissons avec les femmes là. Puis l'usine paye plus cher que les femmes. Donc les pêcheurs ici qui partent en mer, s'ils viennent, il va avec les usines. S'il ne va pas avec les usines, il ne va pas ce qu'il veut. C'est les usines qui gagnent l'argent.
In 2022, Senegal exported almost 6,000 tons of fish meal to Spain, an exponential growth compared to the previous year. In the same year, neighboring Mauritania exported 9,000 tons of fish meal to Europe, almost all of which ended up in Spain, and Morocco exported 56,000 tons, mainly to Greece and Spain. The same exploitation of resources is taking place on an even more important scale in South America, especially in Peru, where around 5 million tons of anchovetas, or anchovies, are caught every year, mainly destined for the production of fish meal. According to the FAO, globally about 20 million tons of fish caught each year are used for non-food purposes, to produce mainly fish meal and fish oil. Is this how aquaculture promises to feed the global population?
Entonces, aconsejar 2 pescados a la semana a todo el mundo del planeta Tierra, pues es insostenible porque no lo hay. Porque piscifactoría supone pescar. O sea, yo fabrico pescado pescando. Entonces no puedes dar esos consejos que son no éticos, no equitativos, no justos.
The trip to Senegal taught us that there is a conceptual problem related to intensive fish farming. We breed carnivorous fish, salmon in particular, but also Mediterranean sea bass and sea bream because they have a high market value. At the same time, however, we promote aquaculture as a sustainable model to reduce overfishing, feed the world, and make Western diets more sustainable.
People are investing in aquaculture because there's a market. People that invest in aquaculture without thinking about the market is a bigger mistake. Even if they can produce a fantastic product sustainably, etc., but if there's no market, they will go bankrupt.
According to Lovatelli, the industry is working to solve the problem of feed sustainability thanks to technology and the use of alternatives to fish meal and fish oil. To find out more, we visit an international aquaculture expo in northern Italy, focusing on supply chains and raw materials for the production of fish feeds.
There will be more and more different alternative materials for fish feed, raw materials, and that is due to the fact that we cannot rely on just a few sources of raw materials, and especially marine resources are scarce and limited.
The reason the fish farming industry is in an uproar over raw materials is not so much sustainability as it is the cost of fish meal, which has soared in recent years, placing an unsustainable burden on corporate balance sheets. At the expo, we find stands offering insect or soy-based feeds, still others studying an increased use of animal waste from intensive chicken and pig farms. In reality, the problem is far from solved, and every alternative raw material brings with it problems to some extent. The cost of soybeans, for example, has been steadily increasing for years, not to mention the leading role of soy crops in tropical deforestation. For this reason, the fishing industry is looking with growing interest at unexploited raw material. Among these, one in particular attracts our attention.
Krill is a very important protein source for the fish feed industry. It is a newish product that we're using. In the southern oceans, there are vast quantities of krill.
Antarctic krill is a sort of shrimp, a few centimeters long, at the base of the food chain of the entire Southern Ocean. This small organism, which lives mainly in schools, is the basis of the diet of most wildlife populations in Antarctica, from whales to seals to fish to penguins to flying seabirds.
As a fish feed producer, we are looking for alternatives to several ingredients that we're using, including fish meal and fish oil, from different perspective, from an economical perspective, sustainable perspective, but also, of course, from a biological perspective. And krill is actually one of the ingredients we are also using in not all of our products, but some specific products, because it's also an expensive ingredient. Shrimps as well, but mostly in our salmonid feeds. So feeds for trout and also salmon. That's where we use it.
In the 1970s, the Soviet Union was the first to start industrial krill fishing. After a decline in the 1980s, krill demand and fisheries have picked up again in the last 2 decades, reaching a production of 451,000 tons in 2020.
From an ecological perspective, so we are taking something that is lower in the food chain, so we're not taking the fish meal, but something that is lower, so it could be considered more sustainable.
Thus we approach the final stage of our journey, to understand if krill fishing is really a sustainable response to the excessive need of fish meal. We decide to go on a long journey and get to know the true face of this fishing up close.
This is our warehouse. This is where we receive all the krill meal that comes from Antarctica. We actually make 3 products: oil for human nutrition, meal for use in pet, and then we're making a meal for aquaculture also.
We are located in a warehouse area near the port of Montevideo, Uruguay. Thousands of tons of krill meal pass through this shed every day, produced by the Norwegian company Aker Biomarine, the world's leading producer. The sacks of meal reach Montevideo from Antarctica every few weeks, and from there they are shipped all over the world.
We have 3 fishing vessels operating in Antarctica, and we have 1 vessel that is in charge of the transport, which is a transport vessel, Antarctic provider. It comes to Montevideo port every roughly 45 days, maybe 60 days, and goes out to Antarctica with the crew change. And at the same time, then they unload all the meal that they have produced and bring to Montevideo to our warehouse here.
80% of our volume goes to aquaculture. We intend to produce maybe 40,000 tons for aquaculture and pets, and that's just not a lot in terms of like the needs of aquaculture, but it's one of those alternative ingredients that can be part of helping the aquaculture move away from fish meal.
Aker Biomarine talks about krill fishing as a champion of sustainability. To do this, they co-founded with 8 other krill fishing companies from different countries, the Association of Responsible Krill Harvesting Companies.
If you look at the long picture between 1920s and today, it seems that the krill population has been declining, particularly after the 80s. But if you look at the shorter time, which we have better data, of course, from the 1990s to 2020, it seems that the population has oscillated, so has been changes a lot, but has been remaining stable in that oscillation.
Scientists agree on a different opinion, claiming that krill fishing interferes with an ecosystem already heavily affected by the climate crisis. It is precisely to find out more that we have reached the end of the world, Punta Arenas, in Chilean Patagonia. This is where the logistics base for the krill harvesting expeditions to Antarctica is located.
There is this interannual highly variability of the krill biomass, but also there are evidences that this biomass is decreasing through time, meaning that even in the higher periods of higher biomass, it's lower than it was in the past. As a general, in the northern part of the Antarctic Peninsula, the Pigocelis penguins populations are decreasing. The biomass of krill in the northern part of the Antarctic Peninsula is also suffering changes, local decreases and changes in the main distribution.
present, penguins are the animals that are most suffering the competition from fisheries in the supply of krill.
There's less krill available and whales are consuming more. And we also have the fishing that comes in the area and currently is fishing more than it was fishing 10 or 20 years ago. So it's probably a mix of factors that are taking this effect over the penguin populations.
These images were recorded in 2023 by the Sea Shepherd organization and the Bob Brown Foundation in Antarctica. Huge ships trawl for krill in the midst of schools of whales, depriving them of their main food, an activity that is still legal today, which raises alarms among scientists studying whales in Antarctica, whose populations in recent years were timidly returning to growth after a century of wild hunting had brought them to the brink of extinction. The plans of the industry, however, are different. The idea is to increase exponentially the amount of krill that can be fished in the waters surrounding Antarctica.
We are allowed to catch only 1% of the total biomass available. And this is very small amount for a small pelagic species. Usually for any anchovy or sardine fishery, kind of which produce fish meal, you are fishing about 40 to 60% of the stock. We expect in the future that the catches will not be static as now, it will change year to year. The expectation is that with the new management system, the quota may increase. I truly believe that will increase because, as I mentioned, the krill some years is really abundant.
With the amount of uncertainties that exist, in my opinion, we should already have some areas protected to avoid that uncertainty affect the krill stocks.
Following the fish farming industry, the latest and most recent model of intensive farming on the planet, which today involves at least 130 billion fish globally, we have reached the end of the world. A foreseeable goal for a journey driven by a food system that is only capable of speaking the language of growth, of increased production, and which fails to focus on a rational and equitable use of resources, or on the protection and regeneration of ecosystems. While we are in Punta Arenas, we meet local indigenous peoples who are living a conflict similar to the one we documented in Greece at the beginning of our story. Intensive fish farms, owned by large investment funds, are expanding among the pristine fjords of Patagonia. Until a few years ago, salmon was an alien species in Chile. Today, the country has become the second largest producer in the world.
Efectivamente, hoy hay muchas salmoneras dentro de áreas protegidas, como es el caso de la Reserva Nacional Cahuéscar. Cuando la industria empieza a irrumpir dentro del territorio, los primeros que pusimos la voz de alerta fueron los pescadores, los cahuéscar que todavía transitan. Ellos fueron los primeros en darse cuenta y uno de ellos, mi papá.
I want to give you an example of what happened between Norway and Chile. It's a very clear example. I mean, Norway, that basically the aquaculture of salmon started, or is there and is very big, is highly regulated. Very restrictive in how in what they're doing and how they do it in their expansion and licensing, etc., etc. The industry in Chile was not started by the Chileans alone. There was a lot of interest from Scandinavian countries or Northern European countries which are in salmon farming and others, Japan and what have you. They went there. And they had, let's say, the Wild West, meaning that they did not have those rules and regulations, which at times are very restrictive for the expansion of an industry. They didn't have it. So they went wild. They invested into systems and locating farms in areas at the density that no way in a country like Norway was allowed. Really, I would say this, that the Chilean authorities maybe allowed this to happen because it was just to get the industry started. You know, Chile is the second largest producer of salmon. And in the past years, with all the disease problems that were caused in salmon farming in Latin America, had actually switched on a little lamp in the heads of the authorities, saying, okay, now it's time to start regulating a bit more.
Estamos viendo un capítulo que ya observamos, pero de una forma distinta. Además de tener que sobrevivir al genocidio, de sobrevivir a la colonización, seguimos en segunda parte, digamos, podríamos decirle la segunda parte de la colonización del territorio cahuéscar.